The Instructor Podcast with Terry Cook, talking with leaders, innovators, experts and game changers about what drives them.
Welcome to the Instructor Podcast. This is a show that helps you become an even more awesome driving instructor and run a better driving school. As always, I am your splendid host, Terry Cook. I'm delighted to be here, but even more delighted that you have chosen to listen. Because today we are joined by Sharon Huddleston and Dr. Ian Greenwood. And I'm delighted to welcome these guys back to the podcast as they talk about their campaigns for safer roads, as well as sharing their own personal stories behind the reasons why, and, of course, even share their thoughts on driving instructors as well. But just before we get stuck into today's episode, I want to ask you a little favour. Click subscribe or follow, whatever you're listening, whether that's on Apple or Spotify or even on YouTube. Go and click subscribe or follow. Firstly, you'll get all these episodes into your feed as soon as we drop them. But secondly, it actually helps with the discovery of the podcast as well. So do me a favour, go and click subscribe or follow. And if you're not already, definitely make sure you follow us on YouTube because I've got some treats coming up for you in August. But for now, let's get stuck into the show. So today I'm delighted to welcome back two former guests of the Instructor Podcast. First up, we are joined by Sharon Huddleston, who first appeared on March of 2024. How are we doing, Sharon?
I'm all right, thank you, Terry. Thank you for inviting me to speak again.
I'm delighted to have you along. I'm also joined by Dr. Ian Greenwood, who was on the sister podcast of this, the Driving Instructors and Vision Zero podcast, on September of 2024. How are we doing, Ian?
Morning, Terry. All good, thanks. Thanks for inviting me too. Hi, Sharon.
Hello, Ian.
So, well, I must also give another little shout out to Lee Jowett, who reached out to me and said that he had an idea for the podcast, which was to get you two on. And I excitedly said, yes, let's do that. And after much meandering from me, we finally arranged it. So I'm looking forward to speaking with you two, because I kind of alluded to beforehand that there's a lot of instructors I know personally have been impacted by not just your stories, but by the campaigning that you do as well. And I know have adapted and changed and completely rehashed the way they teach in some instances. But we have had a lot of new listeners since 2024, over the last couple of years, a lot of new people listen. So I do think it's worth sort of looking at your stories and what you're doing now. So I think I'm going to start with you first, Sharon. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about sort of what you're campaigning for and the reason behind that?
Yeah, so my campaigning is for graduated driving licensing. The reason for that is that in July of 2017, my daughter, Caitlin, was killed as a passenger in a newly qualified teenage driver's car. It was Caitlin's friend that was driving, and sadly, she was killed too that evening. The girls were going for an evening meal to a restaurant, and we live in a very rural area. And approximately 15 minutes after the girls set off on the journey, there was a horrific collision that happened. The newly qualified driver had lost control on a wet bend in the rural road, and the car spun onto the opposite carriageway directly in front of and kind of into a van that was travelling in the opposite direction. Caitlin was killed on impact as it was a side impact into the front passenger door where Caitlin was sitting. And the back seat passenger, she was seriously injured, and the van driver was seriously injured as well. So 4 families were impacted that evening, 2 families bereaved and 2 others having to live with lifelong injuries. And the girls were all 18. And not long after, I wasn't getting any answers about the crash or anything, and I wasn't coping with the death of our daughter. And so I reached out to Break, the road safety charity, as I'd been handed a folder when we'd gone to identify Caitlin the day after she was killed. And at the time I was handed this folder, I did kind of think, what's that going to do? I've just lost my daughter horrifically. But now, thank goodness, I did reach out to Break because they have been an absolute lifesaver to me going through this horrific grief of losing a child in a road traffic collision. And through them, I found out about graduated driving licensing, which is a law in other countries that helps to save many lives on roads. And then finding out that realization that it could have saved Caitlin's life was just such a shock to me that I thought I've got to do something about this. And at the inquest, we found out that we could ask the coroner for a preventing future deaths report. And so we did do. And thankfully, the coroner agreed to write a preventing future deaths report. He fully supported what I was asking for, which was that newly qualified drivers, teenage drivers, don't carry their friends as passengers for a limited amount of time until they've gained more experience, driving solo or with an older experienced driver first. And this hit all the media and the national headlines kind of thing, because it was the first time a preventing future deaths report had been written, recommending to the Department for Transport that a graduated driving licensing should be implemented in the UK, well, nationwide is what the coroner said, to help save lives on our roads. And then with getting the media attention about that, it was kind of like, oh my God, kind of thing, because we're just an ordinary family, that this horrific thing had happened to. So I eventually agreed to speak with media. The BBC got involved. And from then on, it's just roller coastered kind of thing into full-time campaigning for me. That's my way of coping with my grief, of coping with the loss of Caitlin, in that I feel that I'm still doing something for her rather than just visiting her in a churchyard now. It's like as though she's still with me when I'm doing my campaigning. To be given the opportunities to speak about Caitlin means a lot to me. And actually, her anniversary has fallen just this week. The 14th of July is the anniversary. And people are so kind. The people that have reached out to me, and one really, really special thing that has happened this week is that my eldest daughter, Hannah, her neighbour lost her husband recently, very suddenly actually, to cancer. And his funeral was last Friday. And of course, the town that we live in know exactly what happened with Caitlin and her friends, and they know about the crash, because it was such a horrific thing that had happened in such a small place that we live in. She knocked on Hannah's door a few days ago when it was Caitlin's anniversary, and they had asked people at the funeral to donate to two charities. One was Andy's Man Club and the other was Break, the road safety charity. And so they brought some money round that had been raised at the funeral of Hannah's neighbour. And that just meant so much to us, to bring that to us on that day when it's such a difficult day. I just thought it was a beautiful gesture from somebody that is going through their own grief at the moment, to think about Caitlin and bring that money for the road safety charity that everybody in the town knows, that has helped me, because I speak about Break so highly all the time whenever I speak. For them to do that on that day meant the world to us. And Break is so pleased about it as well, this donation that's been given. So that's the background to my campaigning. It's in memory of my daughter Caitlin, and through her name, I hopefully can stop other people going through this.
What a beautiful story, Sharon.
Oh, thank you.
The events of this week, it just demonstrates just how many thousands and thousands of people are impacted by road crashes, and in your little town in Cumbria. And that beautiful gesture just kind of illustrates that, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. I mean, it's affected so many people. Caitlin's friends, my sister-in-law had gone to the churchyard to put her flowers with Caitlin the other day, and she found one of Caitlin's friends crying there, and it's 9 years since Caitlin was killed. but time makes no difference. In fact, it makes it worse because it's longer since you've seen them, and it's all that wondering what they will be doing now and everything like that. And that really upset me as well, to hear that one of her friends was upset up at the churchyard, having a little cry with Caitlin. So yeah, people are just so lovely. There's some lovely people in the world.
It's a lovely story, and I really appreciate you sharing that, because I think we live in a time now where there seems to be a lot of negativity around, around a lot of different things. So take almost a positive little story there. I like that. And one thing I will share actually is that I know that the episode I did with you, that was the episode that got a lot of instructors thinking about graduate driving licensing differently, including me. I think I used to look at it as a very political thing. I didn't really see the personal side behind it. And it was speaking to you, Sharon, that made me realize that. And I know that myself and other instructors, some of us at least, have taken it upon ourselves that, okay, there may not be graduate driving license in the UK, but that doesn't mean that we can't apply a form of GDL with our pupils or discuss it with our pupils and talk about it with the parents. So I know that there's a growing number of instructors now that, while we can't enforce it, we can kind of talk to the pupils and say, okay, this passengers in your car, nighttime driving, have that discussion and share it with parents. So I think your episode did influence some instructors, and I appreciate you sharing that. Thank you.
Thank
And I want to ask the same to you, Ian, just kind of your campaign and your sort of story and reasons behind it.
So Terry, Sharon and I met in 2020. So we have similarities in terms of how we got to be here with you today and why we do our campaigning, but also some differences. So my story started in 2008. So I have two daughters, Alice and Clara. Clara's well into her 20s and living life to the full, and Alice is forever 12. So what happened on that night in Derbyshire in 2008, basically young people made a mistake. So there were, my family's car wasn't with them. My family was driving home from Towers with my ex-wife and my two daughters, and coming in the opposite direction were 5 young and new drivers, with all of whom had passengers in their cars. In the second car, they were racing. So they were doing about 80 miles an hour, the police said. And they basically, the second car in the race, convoy, if you like, missed the bend. And those 2 young people, car hit my family's car. They both died. He was 18, had been driving for a month. The 16-year-old passenger were both killed, and Alice was also killed. Her neck broke. One of the things that I always talk about when I share the story is the circumstances of the crash. So Sharon's talked about a graduated driving licensing system and what it can do to help save lives. So all the different factors that are mitigated in the GDL were present in the crash that killed Alice. So it was a rural road. It was newly qualified drivers. It was distraction because of passenger involvement. They were all on their phones, texting each other. We know that because of the crash investigation afterwards. The circumstances of the crash, the environment, it was wet, it was dark. So the list is quite extensive in terms of those factors that were present in the crash that killed my daughter. But they are also the things that are mitigated through graduated driving licensing. The other thing that we don't talk about enough, I think, is what happens next. And it's not just me and my family or Sharon and her family, it's everybody else that is involved with these. And we talk a lot about other survivors, people with serious injuries. We talk about the victims around the crash and consequences to families and communities. And Sharon's beautifully illustrated that with what happened this week. But we talk about that quite a lot. What we don't tend to talk about a lot, which I just wanted to mention, is all the other people who are involved. So one of the things I do try and talk about is the poor souls who pitch up to the crash scene, the ambulance service, the fire and rescue service, the police, who turn up at the crash site and see things that they shouldn't be expected to see. And I know from talking to probably hundreds of people now, just how big an impact that has on their mental health and their ability to carry on living their lives, really. And I was talking to one recently who had retired because of PTSD. That's just one example of many because of an accumulation of seeing things that we ask our professional services to see. So that I think is something that we do need to talk about more in terms of the consequences. Yes, we talk about victims, not enough, I think. Yes, we talk about people like me and Sharon, and we do our bit to try and to illustrate just how preventable these crashes are and avoid the consequences that Sharon shared, I've just shared. But we don't get the message across sufficiently to get government to take action. So my journey post recovery, I went back to work, I had a mortgage to pay, I had a career, I had an ex-wife and a daughter in intensive care units. So all that period, Clara came home, her mum didn't for quite a long time. So I was a single parent for a little while. So the first period for me was just practicality of living life, paying mortgage and sorting my own head out and deciding how do you recover from something like that? I've still not answered that, by the way. And then life just carried on. So I had a career. I didn't start doing campaigning as Sharon did initially. I just went back to a very changed but normal life. But the thing that kind of spurred me on was obviously Alice, but also the why question. Why do we not think about road death and injury seriously enough? 29,910 people were killed or seriously injured last year. The approach that we take isn't proportionate to that 29,910 people. And I have asked the question why for a long time. And I guess my campaigning has been different. So I started with, well, why don't we do that? My kind of drive was to try and answer the why question. So I initially decided to do a politics degree and to see whether my brain was still working, to see whether I could answer the why question. So my background's in the health service, so I'm educated and experienced in the health service, but politics was something new. So I did that, and I met an amazing professor from Leeds who said to me, you need to do a PhD, Ian. And I went, don't be daft. My age, I'm too old. I'm not clever enough. Anyway, fast forward, I ended up doing a PhD, and she ended up being one of my two supervisors. And I wanted to ask the question, why? Why do we not respond appropriately to road death, injury? Even the amount of crashes that happen on our roads they're every single day, many, 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 many times. So I did a PhD. Lots of my family said I was completely mad. They're probably right. But I got a PhD trying to understand why. And I guess that's when I started campaigning, because after the PhD, you have to be politically neutral and objective and scientific. So although I had campaigned in West Yorkshire where I live, prior to that, I made a fundamental mistake by trusting politicians by asking them to do things in private. And I learned that, which I guess at my age was maybe a little bit naive, but I just hoped that people would go, oh yes, West Yorkshire needs to do something differently with road safety, and let's do something, but they didn't. So afterwards, I changed tack, so I went public. And the reason I guess I did all of that was I didn't want my story that much in the public domain. And I think we ask people like me and Sharon, we society, politicians ask society, I ask of society to listen to people like me and Sharon to share something that's really very private. And I will do that willingly because I want change. And I know Sharon does the same. We shouldn't have to do that. People should already understand the impact of what happens to these devastating, traumatic, instant crashes that devastate lives. We still do what we do, and we do it willingly, I think. But certainly from my point of view, I didn't want to be in the space. I'm a very private person. But it happened in terms of when you start speaking, people start listening. And that is something that is really helpful. It's helpful from a mental health point of view, because Alice's life hopefully wasn't wasted. She should be in her 30s now. Goodness knows what she will be doing. But it partly helped me and my family to know that people still talk about her. Our family and friends still talk about her. but actually using her traumatic death to make a difference to other people. And similarly to Sharon, we don't want this to happen to anybody else. And so my campaigning focuses on those factors that were important or affected by the crash that killed Alice. So I focus on children, I focus on rural roads, I focus on those factors that contribute to the deaths in that set of circumstances, but obviously importantly, graduated driving licensing. And so I fell into graduated driving licensing and campaigning probably more by accident. Sharon's described a deliberate set of steps that she took. Mine was different. It was more by just talking about the crash that killed Alice and the factors that contributed to it. Graduated driving license, because it is political and in some spheres controversial, that's the area that I guess people know me for. They know me less for the other things that I do. And I met Sharon in 2020 when the last Transport Committee did an inquiry into road safety. It was specifically on young and novice drivers back then, and I gave evidence to the committee. And we were introduced to another family, the Taylors, and we all met in 2000. It was the forerunner to Forget Me Not Families Uniting in 2020 when it wasn't named, but that's essentially where things started. And that's where we kind of got together and decided that we would campaign in a different way, rather than all of us getting on a train and going to see a minister on our own, which we all did. And we all nodded and sagely and tilted their head to one side and told us how sympathetic we all were. And then we all came home again and nothing happened. So we decided we'd do our campaigning together, and I'm sure we'll explore that today.
I think one thing I will say is I sometimes struggle to articulate my thoughts very well initially. You're somebody in that whenever if something pops up in the news and I'm struggling to get my brain around it, I go and look on LinkedIn and see if you've written something about it, because you're really good at helping me going, yes, that's what I think, and I can't word that. So, but I did just want to say as well,
Thank you.
I don't have kids. I've never had kids, and therefore I've never lost a child. So I can't imagine what that feels like. But I'm just curious just to ask you a little bit about me and Sharon and vice versa, and the Forget Me Not family. How important was that?
So if I focus on the people that I've met rather than the group, so it's quite lonely when you campaign on your own. As I said, I'm very private, so I'm pretty rubbish at reaching out to group things and group therapy and group anything really, because I'm just wired the way I am. So I recognized that there was something missing, and I engaged with Break, as Sharon did, and lots of other people in a kind of more professional way, if that makes sense. So I would engage with politicians and West Yorkshire Police and various people nationally, government, politicians, whoever, lots and lots of different people. But you kind of do that in a kind of a very transactional way, if that makes sense. You're kind of talking about what happened to Alice and what you're asking the politicians to do. I very much focused on reframing some of the language, because I think the language really helps influence how you can share what's happened. BBC traffic announcements every single day talk about accidents. Every single day I hear about an accident on a road and I think, that's not an accident. That is a series of events that happen. That's a crash or collision. Why can't they change that? And BBC won't. I'm arguing with them again at the moment. I'm trying again with them to see whether they will change that. But back to your question, what meeting Sharon, Nicole and Chris, who are the Taylors, did was offer a more emotional, not in a therapy way, but a more emotional connection, rather than doing what I was doing in a didactic, business-like way, if you like, talking to politicians and police and fire brigade and whoever else. It offered an opportunity to share with a very clear understanding that they're in exactly the same boat that I'm in. And that did make a difference. And we bonded. We bonded as a group. We met very regularly. We had lots of other people who were involved. We set up a group. We had experts. So we were lucky. I don't quite know how we managed it, Sharon, but we managed to encourage 3 of the UK leading experts four of the UK leading experts to join our group. So we were informed by academics who were experts in young driver safety, who'd published, researched, collected data for decades and decades. And that guided us as campaigners. And eventually we ended up with Forget Me Not Families Uniting formally a few years later. And I think the fact that the four of us met back then was, certainly from my point of view, offered a different degree, a different type of support in terms of the loneliness of campaigning on your own. You of course, you know that there's hundreds of people out there. Of course, you know that. You can see them. You can see them in the papers and the news, and every single day you read about another crash. 4 people every day are killed. I think it's something like 82 people. I'll put last year's data, but it's something like 82 people who are killed or seriously injured every single day. And having Sharon, Nicole, and Chris over that period of time was both informative in terms of shaping the campaign that we've been doing, but also just on an emotional level, really helpful to know that you're not on your own, that actually there are people that I know, and I know lots more people now. Sharon knows more because she's much better at those networks and those connections and that kind of emotional side of things than I am. But just knowing that people are there. Sharon and I probably talk every week. Even it might be a text, it might be a phone call. And that just helps you with the drumbeat of campaigning. It helps you when you have your lows and your dips and oh my God, it's horrible and this has happened and I can't stand this particular thing that happened last week or whatever that might have been. You kind of get back on, back on the horse in the saddle, if you like, and you just keep going. And you keep going in part because of people like Sharon and Chris and Nicole and many, many, many others.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, going back to like the start of us all meeting, what it was for me was that I needed to speak to other bereaved parents. That was part of my coping mechanism, is that I needed to speak to other bereaved parents. And I'd seen on the Road Peace website at the time, Pete and Ondine Campbell and their daughter Fern, and they were campaigning for GDL. So I'd reached out to Road Peace, and it was Victoria Lebrecht. And at the time, that family were going through an awful court case, and so they weren't ready to kind of formally start campaigning for GDL, even though GDL would have saved Fern's life. They had too much to deal with at the time with the court case. And so that was then that Victoria said to me about Miss Nicole Taylor. And then she came back to me and said that she'd had another man get in touch with her, and it was Ian. And so then she organised these online meetings, didn't she? And because at the time we were in lockdown, and it was kind of Victoria's suggestion that we all speak together, even though I needed to speak to other people. It never came into my head to have these like Zoom meetings and what have you together, but that was how it kind of all came about, was speaking together. And with the researchers all getting involved as well, it was that for the Caitlin's campaign website, I was trying to add as much information to the website as possible with us setting it up. We launched it on Caitlin's 20th birthday, actually, which always falls during Breaks Road Safety Week. And I'd seen online about Dr. Sarah Jones being the world's leading expert in GDL, it said about her. So I'd reached out to Sarah and she agreed to an interview for the Caitlin's campaign website. And that was brilliant what she did, the interview. She is absolutely amazing when she speaks about GDL. It just all makes sense what she says. And then she said to me she was in touch with Sean Hellman from Transport Research Laboratory. Would I like to speak to him as well? And so then I wrote to Sean, and he wrote back about how he got involved in researching graduated driving licensing. And then Sean said, would it be all right to introduce Neil and bring him into the meetings as well? And so it all kind of roller coastered like that kind of thing. And then Liz Box as well got involved. And I think that may have been through Chris and Nicole Taylor reaching out to Liz. I'm not certain, but I think that was. But as I said, we then every month we were having these meetings, and we've just got this bond now haven't we, Ian? That, it's really, I'm so grateful to Victoria for us introducing us all kind of thing. And as you said, then it was the idea of, well, if there's us three families, and then more and more I was hearing about, it was then that idea of we all need to be together doing this. And then, well, 2023, the idea came about forming this bigger group of us all. And that's when a specific name was put to it, which was Forget Me Not Families United. So yeah, I need that connection with bereaved families that totally understand when they've lost a child through the same circumstances kind of thing. And that's really helped me. But I think as well, it is that knowing that somebody's there. So if I am having a bad day, who Ian usually gets the text message from me, yeah, and then we put the will to rights, and then we move on, kind of thing, don't we, Ian? And carry on with our campaigning. So it's just nice to know that they're there for us. Everybody's there for us, because we all know what we're going through. And campaigning is so difficult. It's more difficult than what I realised it would be when I decided to start campaigning. There is knockbacks all the time. And, to find out that graduated driving licensing has been spoken about for decades, and all these researchers have done all this research and given the evidence to government, and still nothing has been put in place as yet. It is hard and it's very frustrating, but I think when these specific dates come about, it puts that fire back in your belly as, I am going to speak up for my child. I am going to carry on doing this. And as I put in my LinkedIn post the other day on Caitlin's anniversary, while there's breath in my body, I will fight for justice for my daughter.
The other thing, Perry, that I think whilst the current government still are not considering, not considering graduated driving licensing, one of the things that Sharon and I talk about is by having a profile, whatever that means. I don't really know what that means actually, but I get a lot of people, I know Sharon does too, asking about what a graduated driving licensing system is and how they can apply it to their young person in their life. And that for me is one of the reasons I keep going. There's lots of other reasons which I've shared, but one of the reasons is that by talking about how we can help new drivers, young drivers, we can get them. Most of them are really sensible. Most of them understand what a GDL is. And most of them will want to not be a daft driver. Back round to how important driving instructors are in this space as well. But one of the things about having a profile is that those conversations are now happening because it's in the media, because it's in professional organisations. It is much more visible. And because it is much more visible, people are talking about it. And because people are talking about it, they're putting in their own graduated driving licensing. So I hear a lot of people say, well, actually, I'm not going to allow my young person to do this or that because I'm paying for their insurance, and actually I want them to survive their first formative years as a new driver. And that's really important, because back to what both Sharon and I have both said, we want to make a difference. And even if that's not currently the current government doing anything substantive in terms of GDL, other than in Northern Ireland, by having that conversation visible, other people are making changes, and that's a good thing.
I think as well with Caitlin's case is what I always want to highlight, and I think it's like a prime example of why GDL is needed, is that the coroner put it down to inexperience. I always wanted to make people aware that there was no breaking of any laws, that the newly qualified driver, she was driving a little too fast for her experience of driving on that wet river road, and she didn't have another driver in the car with her to advise her to slow down. You're coming up to a corner now. She was my son's girlfriend, and maybe if Aidan had been sat in the car with her, he could have advised her, with him being that bit older and had been driving for a few more years than her. But Caitlin, the friend in the back, weren't drivers, and so they couldn't give any advice to her to slow down. There's a bend coming up now. And also, I also like to always point out that it was a female driver. That, there's always lots of judgments when a crash has occurred, I feel. And that's why I always like to point out that it was a female driver and there was no breaking of any laws. It was purely inexperience. And that is what a lot of the research on GDL shows, that it's youth and inexperience. She'd only been driving for 4 months and she was only 18 years old. We know that the brain development the brain isn't fully developed at that age. And so, I always want to point that out, because this isn't about blame in any way. It's about this crash could have been prevented if this life-saving law had been in place. I just wanted to add that as well, because I didn't put that in. I didn't say that at the beginning about the crash.
That's really important, though, Sharon, isn't it? How we talk about this stuff influences how people respond. So
Yeah.
the current Secretary of State, I haven't heard her talk about anything else other than the drive. So I'm like you, geeky. We keep an eye on what they're all saying and doing. So I may have missed it, so I apologise if I have missed it. But every single speech or every single question that has been answered is all about the young driver.
Yeah.
Young drivers account for, again, I should have written the numbers down, but it's something like 27% of all KSIs are the driver. The other 70% are other road users and their passengers. And one of the things that Sharon and I spend a lot of time talking about is it's not just about the driver. And of course, that's really important. And we don't want to not talk about the young driver, but the others have a right to be in this space as well. And I don't know what else the Department for Transport would call other road users. I don't know what the word would be, but just it feels like, emotionally, it feels like an afterthought. Alice and the 50% of other people who were killed in young driver collisions, just feels like, it's others. We kind of all forget about those. And then when the government doesn't talk about them, that's why framing is really important. And that's one of the reasons why Sharon and I do what we do. Sharon always talked about Caitlin as a passenger and that nobody did anything wrong, inherently wrong. There are lots of drivers who do break the law, and they get the profile. It's all that daft young lad that did something daft, something stupid, broke the law, didn't have his seatbelt on, was speeding, was on drunk. We talk about that a lot. What we don't talk about are, one, the consequences on passengers and other road users, but also in terms of it is about their inexperience. It's about the maturity of their brain. Sharon mentioned neurophysiology, and adolescence lasts a long time. So we often will blame the young driver, and often it's not necessarily their fault. There are obviously some where they make some stupid choices, and it very definitely is their fault, but that shouldn't frame how we talk about this stuff. It's about helping a young driver to be safe, having the skills and experience through what driving instructors and their family, parents, whoever, will instill within them. But then we don't then talk about what happens next. And that's why it's really important that we don't blame them. We want to engage young people in this space to make them better drivers, but also to stop other families like mine and Sharon's going through what we've been through. But framing and language is really very, very important.
Yeah, the messaging is important, isn't it? That's the thing. The messaging around GDL, I feel, is important. Getting the right, as you say, language around GDL. It's safeguarding our young drivers. We have safeguards in every other area of life. Why not in driving? So I think that's important as well. We need to get it across to families, parents in particular, because as I've said before, I was totally unaware of graduated driving licensing before this happened to our family. And to think that, for decades before, this was being spoken about in Parliament and other bereaved families campaigning long before I was, just needs to be spoken about more, and to get that information out to parents as much as possible. And that's why I'm so grateful that driving instructors are now getting in touch with me and asking me to speak at events, because they're the first contact with these young people and the parents that are learning to drive. And so it's very important to me to get that correct message out to as many parents as possible, because I think a lot of people, if I probably went out into the street in a city or somewhere, I mean, as I say, in my local area, everybody knows what I campaign for. But I think if I went into a city and stopped somebody in the street and asked them, do you know what graduated driving licensing is? A lot of people may not know, or may have the wrong impression of it, that it's putting restrictions in place, them negative words, where it's not. I always think of it as it's got to be thought of along the lines of an apprenticeship. We have, apprenticeships in workplaces, and that's to keep everybody safe, and so we need these safeguards in place for driving, because, at the end of the day, this is the second leading cause of death in the UK is road traffic collisions. But worldwide, it's the leading cause of death. And I don't think a lot of people realise that either, because in the media, it's always spoken about other deaths by young people, such as their knife crime, and, the social media ban is coming into place soon as well for young people. And so I don't think a lot of people realise that, high up on that list, the second leading cause of death is road traffic collisions in our younger generation. So the more we speak about this, the better.
Hello, my name is Stuart Lochray. I'm the founder at Bright Coaching. Driving instruction has changed. Today's learners need more than just skills and practice and reps to pass a driving test. They need coaching that addresses the higher levels of the GDE on every single lesson. That's why we created the Professional Diploma in Coaching and Behavioural Change for Safe Driving. This accredited qualification, equivalent to a BTEC Professional Award Level 4-5, gives you the tools and recognition to transform the way you teach. With Bright Coaching, you can leave the DVSA behind and step into a modern, learner-focused approach, one that shifts the paradigm of driver education for instructors, for pupils, and for parents all across the country. At Bright Coaching, we are training the next generation of driving instructors. To check availability for our online cohorts and in-person cohorts, please visit the website at brightcoaching.net, and you can also sign up to our mailing list, where you'll be informed of all the latest early bird discounts as they become available.
With standards checks due to return in 2026, ensure your success with KIT. Knowledgeable instructor training, the UK's most comprehensive instructor training provider. Whether you are looking for classroom-based workshops, in-car training, online webinars, or resources to explore in your own time, such as our ebook collections or our video hub for short videos that you can watch between lessons, make sure 2026 is a hit with KIT.
It's interesting that you mentioned there the social media ban. I've seen recently the banning energy drinks for under 16s.
Yeah.
I just think of that and I think, hold on, we've got road death and energy drinks. And I'm not saying we shouldn't ban energy drinks. That's not what I'm saying. But which is going to have the biggest impact? But somehow they feel like it's going for that. And when I think of the whole premise of it, it's like if we were designing a process now of someone learning to drive, it wouldn't be a 50-question theory test, 40-minute driving test in an area you've probably driven around, and no mandated training, and then you're off. If driving didn't exist and we would designing it from scratch, that would be completely different. And I don't know where it comes from. That I can take lots of different guesses, but it's that resistance to it, that consistent resistance to it, isn't it?
Barry, one of the things that is kind of really difficult to understand, but also you scratch your head, is the inconsistency across government about where they're prepared to legislate and where they're not. So the legal definition of a child still in the UK is Children Act, which says that a child is somebody who's under the age of 18. So that's all 17-year-olds who drive. Government deems that 17-year-olds can drive, but they can't have energy drinks, they can't do social media, they can't take a mortgage out, there's a whole raft of things that they're not able to do. But for historical reasons, we allow 17-year-olds to drive. So we don't campaign to change the age, because I guess that would be political suicide. But we do campaign to help adolescents get through, because we help them get through all the other things like mortgages, like or voting. We 16-year-olds don't vote in England. That's going to change. So we allow them to vote and to drive, but we don't allow them to do all the other things. But then government won't help them through a graduation, like an apprenticeship, as Sharon describes it, to help them get experience and get more mature and get older, which is a really valid part of this. And that inconsistency is just essentially end.
Has there been any change since you've been campaigning? Have you noticed that, whether that's political or cultural or just the way you've changed potentially? Has there been any change?
Well, the biggest change is that we've got a road safety strategy. I think that's the biggest thing since I've started campaigning. I think we've got Lillian Greenwood now that totally understands the need for GDL, actually. She's always supported my campaign in all my years of campaigning. She's supported me. Maybe you want to come in here, Ian, and my mind's gone blank.
So I think the things for me, I agree with Sharon. So when I did wrote my thesis, we hadn't had an effective road safety strategy, I would argue, from 2000. We had one in 2011, which wasn't even called a strategy and actually took us backwards. So if we think that this government has done a road safety strategy, good for them. That's one of the things I've campaigned for over the years, is that we need to talk about this stuff. It needs to have a national focus. We need a strategy and then actual plans and the conversation that then follows, which is positive. We haven't had that since, well, I would say 2000, maybe 2011, if I'm being generous. And what follows from a road safety strategy is a conversation. It ends up in the media. It ends up on podcasts, Terry, like this.
Mm-hmm.
We talk about this stuff, and that's really important. And if you look at what happened in 1987 and 2000 were the two most effective road safety strategies that we had in Britain, a big part of the strategies was politicians getting out there and talking to the media, talking to their constituents, talking to the general public about why we need to do various interventions to save lives and to stop injury and to save money and to stop people going into the NHS and all the reasons why we need to do that. So that's really, really important. And what's gone along with that, and I think me and Sharon in no small, well, we'll see how big a part that's played, but by talking about graduated driving licensing specifically, you've invited us to this podcast, Terry. Had we not done what we've done, I doubt that would have happened. We get invited into conferences, into the media, and we laugh at each other because we're going, God, the BBC have been in touch again, and it's really quite funny because neither of us ever wants to do this stuff. So the point I'm making is that it's part of the discourse now. It's part of the conversation. And I'm going to pick on a journalist now, ex-politician. Ed Balls interviewed people a few years ago on the telly about graduated driving licensing. And he was laughing, and he was very kind of dismissive, and driving is a right, isn't it? It's not a privilege. It's what all young drivers. I remember when I was a young driver and the story came out, that was really offensive, but it was also indicative of the kind of narrative at the time. Fast forward, Ed Balls interviewed somebody else on the telly, and it was very, very different. And I think that whilst picking on an individual, sorry, Ed, don't know you, what that demonstrated to me was the discourse change. It moved from a bit of a joke and a bit of, well, we don't want to do that, do we? Because we don't want our young drivers to be penalised and stop them doing what they're doing, to a conversation that's much more balanced. So I think that's been one of the biggest changes for me. Yes, we've got a road safety strategy. Yes, that's really important. The conversation has definitely shifted. And lots of the big polling organisations have done polls. And one of the things that I get cross with government about is there's an IPPR poll, there was a Break poll, there was a YouGov poll. There's been loads of them in the last year or so, and there's older ones. The general public are very, very supportive of interventions that save lives. One of the headlines was people are more prepared to be maybe 2 minutes late if everybody else arrives at their destination safely. Something like 97%. I mean, it's unheard of. probably quoted the wrong number there, but a very, very large number. So that's, for me, is one of the biggest changes, that we are now talking about road safety much more positively and in conversations that are more helpful, more critical in terms of, well, how can we make change? What is it that is the appropriate things to do? Sadly, GDL is not part of what government yet are prepared to do. But by talking about it, that's really, really, I think, really powerful. And I think that's why we've ended up in a large extent where we are today.
I feel like I should clarify one thing, actually, and that is, it is perfectly acceptable on this podcast, at least, to criticise headballs. I have no issue with that at all.
Yeah.
I do want to ask, and I think I want to ask you both, but I'll start with you, Sharon, with this. I think, as we can see, I think there's very, very little significant change. I think even just over the last years, I've seen a slight change in the way it's spoken about. But in terms of like political, it's very little significant behind the road safety strategy. How do you keep going? Because even just for me, does it on a much smaller scale than you, and it's very much tailored toward driving instructors. There are times when I go, oh, I can't be bothered anymore because I'm just headbutting a wall. You know, for someone like yourself that's obviously got a national media, and look, I appreciate what you said, Ian, coming on this podcast. I appreciate this with a highlight compared to BBC and Sky News and everything. I get that. But yeah, Sharon, how do you keep going when you're constantly sort of coming up against these brick walls?
I think it is, as I say, it's because it's my way of coping, and it's the fact that Caitlin's not here. Caitlin's not here, and she should be. I shouldn't be going to a churchyard and placing flowers with her. And special family occasions like this afternoon, you know, the children's tea party I'm going to, Caitlin should be there with all the rest of the family. But that keeps me focused in that, you know, I am going to speak up about Caitlin, that she should be here. But I think as well, as I say, with the kindness that's been shown to me, you know, and as Ian mentioned, we are being contacted by so many people all the time wanting us to speak at conferences and things like that, you know, and go to road safety events. You know, recently I was invited to Hopwood Hall in Manchester to a road safety event where they're wanting to get road safety into the curriculum, and I was invited along to that. And, you know, that means the world to me, kind of, that they've gone to that effort of asking me if I would like to be at that event. It means so much that with me talking about what happened to Caitlin, her name is getting out there, and I'm being invited to events. So keeping myself busy is my way of coping. Keeping my mind focused on this campaigning is very important to me, because as we know that we would do anything for our children as parents, wouldn't we? You know, I'd rather it was me that had been killed that evening than my daughter. She should be living, you know, she should be living her life and looking forward to things. And yeah, I just think it's just the kindness that is shown to people. I mean, recently as well, there's a driving collision investigator, forensic collision investigator from Cumbria, who is retired now. And of course, he knows about Caitlin's case. He worked on Caitlin's case. And he's retired, and he now works for his family's coach company. He reached out to me and asked about, on the back of the coaches, we would put Caitlin's campaign and the Protection Drivers website to kind of get the message out, to help get the message out, because he goes to schools picking school children up, taking them on school trips. And, you know, that kindness to do that, I mean, you know, he's got, I think, 4 coaches at the moment with it on the back of the back windows. And then he's now speaking to other coach companies. So we've now got another coach company that's come along, KT's coaches from Kendal. They've now got 2 coaches with it on the back of their coaches' windows. And so now that's like roller coastering into, now I'm looking at having leaflets made to go on the coaches, because he's having so many people ask about, oh, well, what is that then on the back of the coach? You know, so now I'm getting leaflets made about what Caitlin's campaign is, that, you know, and what go to the Protection Drivers website. So, it's acts like that keep me going as well, because people are showing so much like kindness towards me as well.
And for me, Terry, I guess dads are supposed to look after their daughters, aren't they? Their children, their sons. And I didn't quite manage that with Alice. So, like Sharon, that's a really big, big part of what I do. The other reason is injustice. So I'm wired in a certain way. I quite like logic. I quite like things making sense. And not doing GDL doesn't make sense. And it's like that's back just to the why question. Why won't government do GDL? They talk about evidence. They talk about listening to the public. They talk about coroners' advice being taken on board. But they ignore all of those three factors in terms of young people, young drivers. So that injustice that I see, that they refuse to support young drivers and new drivers in a way that the evidence suggests, in the way that the public demand, and in a way that coroners, like Sharon talked about preventing future deaths earlier. There's a whole stack of them sat on the Department of Transport's desk, but there's a stack for older people and their eyesight, which they've taken action on, or they are consulting on, have consulted on taking action on. But there's the similar pile on the same desk for young drivers and graduated driving licensing that they're not taking account of. So that I see that as injustice, and I see that as illogical. They talk a lot about evidence. The evidence for GDL is about 40 years old. It's across different continents, it's across countries, it's across different disciplines within academia, with neuroscience, neuropsychologists, from human factors, from the whole array of different people who research in these spaces. But they ignore that. So that injustice, that error that I think government is making is really important. And I'm not going to give up. I know full well Sharon's not going to give up either. And there are hundreds of us out there. There are literally hundreds of us out there, government, and their position is illogical. And that's one of the major, other than Alice, which is the major reason. But the other reason is that it just doesn't make sense. Why won't they do it? Why does the Secretary of State talking about driving to Swindon when she was 17 and how wonderful that was? It was a rite of passage, she says. Yeah, that's great. I remember when I was past my test, of course it's a milestone, but it's a privilege and it's something that you need support with, and government won't. And that keeps me going because they have to.
Yeah, and I think with me as well is that we're just, as I've noticed when you look at, which recently there was a submission shared with me and Ian that had been written in the 90s to Transport Select Committee inquiry then. And reading that submission in the 90s, when that was the decade when I was building my family, all my 3 children were born in the 90s. And as I say, I knew nothing about GDL then. To read that submission is now what I am writing in 2026 to the recent Transport Select Committee inquiry. It just beggars belief, really, that it's basically we're going round in circles writing the same thing over and over and over again, every decade kind of thing, or every year even, to government. And really, at the end of the day, we should be saying, well, where's your evidence to not implement this law? All the evidence has been given to them to implement this law and how it will save lives. We've got 7 preventing future death reports from 7 different coroners recommending that GDL's implemented. So where is their evidence not to bring it in as law? We're not getting that back from them, kind of thing. It's their opinion, what they speak about. It's not evidence, isn't it, Ian?
They go quiet, don't they, Sharon? So
yeah.
We have to provide all the things Sharon's just listed, but then we say, why have you said no? And then there's silence. So just a bit of history. 1999, 2007, 2007, 2008, 2021, there were 4 young drive transport committee inquiry reports, all of which 2 were very, very, very strong. One of which it was new back in 1999. So the first 3 all recommended some form of graduated driving licensing or support for young drivers. The 2021 didn't for various reasons. So the point that Sharon's making about how long we've been at this. So we know a family whose son, when did Neil die? Sharon, was it 1984?
86.
86. That family have been campaigning since 1986 when their son was killed in a young driver collision. So various families have been at this for a very, very long time. All different governments of all different stripes have all said no.
Well, the big question then,
without explaining why. Sorry, Terry, without explaining why.
Well, I think that's the question I want to ask, and I appreciate I'll be asking for an opinion here. So I'll ask you, Ian, and if you want to come in after Sharon, that's fine. Why? Why hasn't it? Is it as simple as it's not a vote winner? Why don't we treat road death equal as other death?
So I think that's a really good question, Terry. I scratch at the why thing constantly, and part of the difficulties they won't say. So there's a lack of honesty. So if they was to say, we're going to consult on graduated driving licensing, which they haven't done, and we're going to assess the balance between what's really important for young people, for their freedom, for their mobility, for their ability to travel in rural areas because there's no public transport. Let's have a conversation about how we can maintain the ability of young people to travel around. Oh, by the way, they manage in cities where they don't have cars anyway. So a 17-year-old can quite happily travel around. All those who live rurally, who don't choose to drive, they can still manage to travel around. So there is a balance, is the point I'm making. So there's lots of reasons why we need to encourage people to drive and to, if they choose to, and to have access to education, social work, apprenticeships, etc. Then there's also the conversation about safety, which we've talked about a lot already. We haven't even had that conversation. We haven't had a conversation about where we strike that right balance. Now, Sharon and I and many thousands of others are very clear that that is a graduated driving licensing system where we help young people. But in the absence of a debate, even in a how do politicians manage that kind of political risk? We know from the YouGov poll from December last year that very, very high percentages of all age groups supported graduated driving licensing. So why isn't government being brave? Why isn't government wanting to talk to us, the voters, about graduated driving licensing? There's a major opportunity that's just been missed to do that. So is it because they want to give vote to 16-year-olds? Is it because they're worried about the car lobby? Is it because there's a whole reasons about why things might be the case, and mobility is more important than safety? Really? Do we really say that in the airline industry? Do we really say that it's more important? Well, it's a bit of a risky pilot, but don't worry, it's more important to get on the plane and travel. We don't, back to language, we don't have that framing. We don't use that language in the different ways that we do this. But I think that my main answer to your question, Terry, is we don't know. And we don't know because politicians won't share what their thinking is. If they would come up with we don't agree with the public health intervention, which is what GDL essentially is. It's a population-based public health intervention that saves lives. Let's have the conversation about it. And the fact that they won't breeds kind of, well, I'm being polite, it raises questions, shall we say. And it's back to that lack of logic. It just doesn't make sense. So it's a political choice, is what I would say. It is a political choice by this government and all the other governments that preceded it, not to do GDL, not to support young drivers to be safer, and not to kill kill or seriously injure 4,700 people last time, something like that. Again, I've not collected. I didn't write any numbers down today, so my numbers might not be completely accurate.
Hello, my name is Stuart Lockery. I'm the founder at Bright Coaching. Driving instruction has changed. Today's learners need more than just skills and practice and reps to pass a driving test. They need coaching that addresses the higher levels of the GDE on every single lesson. That's why we created the Professional Diploma in Coaching and Behavioural Change for Safe Driving. This accredited qualification, equivalent to a BTEC Professional Award Level 4-5, gives you the tools and recognition to transform the way you teach. With Bright Coaching, you can leave the DVSA behind and step into a modern, learner-focused approach, one that shifts the paradigm of driver education for instructors, for pupils, and for parents all across the country. At Bright Coaching, we are training the next generation of driving instructors. To check availability for our online cohorts and in-person cohorts, please visit the website at brightcoaching.net, and you can also sign up to our mailing list where you'll be informed of all the latest early bird discounts as they become available.
Worried about your Part 3 or standards check? Can't seem to get it right? Knowledgeable Instructor Training have the kit that you need. Classroom-based CCL workshops, our 2-day in-car rescue kit, and our video hub are specifically designed to not only help you to pass the tests, but to also give you what you need to deliver great CCL lessons. Whatever it is that is the missing bit, Knowledgeable Instructor Training has the kit for you.
Anything you want to add to that, Sharon?
I just think that we shouldn't be putting cars before lives, and I don't understand that at all. I don't understand why a car is more important than a life. As you say, to drive is a privilege, and a lot of people don't choose to drive. So I just don't understand the thinking of the government, and I don't understand when I met with Heidi Alexander, as speaking about, but it was so much fun going on that trip that day when I passed my test and putting all my friends in the car with me. That isn't research, that isn't evidence, that's opinion. And policy should be based on evidence and research.
And a misjudged comment, Terry, dare I say, in front of a bereaved mum whose daughter was killed in a car driven by a young driver with mates. It's really insensitive.
Yeah.
Mm.
But I also wonder if we underestimate young people sometimes. Because we've obviously alluded to Stay earlier about the brain not fully forming for quite a while, and the difference the child until they're 8. We've kind of covered that, but I think we sometimes underestimate them. I'm exactly using one pupil as an example, but I think it reflects a lot, because I had a pupil recently who I was talking to, and she just said, I'm never going to own a car. And I've asked her why she learns to drive. She says, well, I'll need to drive sometime, so I'll hire one. And I'm like, that had never kind of occurred to me before, but we've got someone there that's 17 that's going, I don't really want to drive, I don't really want to own a car, but I know it's going to be convenient, so I'm going to get my license. And then, it was a really interesting conversation, because it led to, well, what if you don't get a car for a year after you pass? She goes, well, I'll come back for a couple of refresher lessons. And I'm like, this is a 17-year-old kid. And yes, not all 17-year-old kids are going to have that exact thing, but I do wonder if you underestimate them. But anyway, I do want to change tact a little bit. And I'm going to ask you first, Sharon, because over the past few years, as we've alluded to today, you've been asked to various events, the BBC and whatnot. But I've seen you personally at events. So Sharon, you was at the ADI and NJC convention this year. Ian, you was up in Scotland for the NJC ScotCon. I'm curious to know, what's the response been like from instructors? You spoke about instructors reaching out to you. What's the response been like from driving instructors?
Oh, it's been amazing, actually, Terry. I've had so many people reach out to me since speaking at that event as well. I mean, I was already in touch with Kate Monk before that event, but I'm speaking with her at the next event in September. But yeah, Dave Leverton, he's a driving instructor. He worked for Bill Plant Driving School. I think he's setting up his own company now. But a few months back, he got in touch with me, and he came to my home and made a video, which I shared in my presentation that day. So yeah, the response has been absolutely lovely. I've been asked to write a blog recently, and also Lee Jowett, he shared a write-up about Caitlin as well that I'd written. So to get their support is absolutely brilliant. Yeah, I'm really grateful.
And yourself, Ian?
Similarly for me, Terry, I guess universally positive, and kind of you can almost see the kind of light bulb going on. I mean, literally, of course I can't see a light bulb going on, but kind of almost people kind of go, oh yes, actually I'm looking at this slightly differently, and I suspect that there are driving instructors out there who we don't know and haven't engaged, who probably need a little bit more persuasion to kind of come to our way of thinking. But that's part of the challenge. But in terms of those that have, I've talked to, Sharon's talked to, universally positive, and the kind of, we can do something about this as driving instructors mentality, which is just delightful to see that even if government are not currently wanting to do very much, you guys see these young people every single day of your working life. And that's what I was saying earlier in the conversation, that actually one of the joys is that we see people engaging in the conversation and doing something about it, whether they are parents, whether they are driving instructors, or whoever they might be. That in of itself makes a big difference. Even if one driving instructor alters the way that they do their job, their career, their profession, to have road safety at even more front and center than maybe it was previously, that's a success. That's why Sharon and I do support you, Terry, in terms of your work, in terms of getting the message across, and all your other colleagues. It's really, really powerful, and we just need to get to those who maybe aren't quite there yet.
Well, I'm curious then, have you formed an opinion on, I suppose, driving instructors or the work we do? And has that changed since you may become a little bit more interactive with driving instructors?
For me, Terry, I guess I was guilty of forgetting about you. So if I look back and about my own driving instructor, she was very influential. Obviously, I remember her name. I remember how she looked. I remember. I mean, it's a very long time ago now for me. I passed my test when I was 17. So I intellectually knew how important driving instructors were, but in my campaigning, I was late to the party, if you like, and I didn't include driving instructors. I didn't include other groups as well, by the way. I wasn't just picking on driving instructors by ignoring you. But that for me, the importance of, we've talked about the ripple effect in terms of society and how many people are involved, and the more people we can engage, like driving instructors and all the others that are involved, the better. So I was late to the party in terms of driving instructors, but I've changed my mind completely. I just think that your profession is pivotal. Okay, your hands are tied by what government requires you to do, but what driving instructors can do is very, very significant in supporting young drivers be safe. So I'm really happy to support what you guys do, and I don't forget about you anymore.
And I've got to mention as well my Caitlin's message, which is in the booklet that's handed out by driving instructors, isn't it? So yeah, I think that was produced in 2022 when I came up with the idea, and Edmund King helped me produce it, and it's in the Learning to Drive the Parents Guide. I've got to mention that too, because that's driving instructors that hand that booklet out. So yeah.
You, Sharon, as I alluded to there, driving instructors have reached out to you. You've been to the conferences where you've met. What are your thoughts on the work we do, and potentially, as I said, has that changed?
I think it's amazing the work that you do, and you know we need to get road safety into the learning to drive process as well. And I think that's what Kate's very passionate about, isn't she? With what she's doing, and then we've got the honest truth as well. And I think they're great initiatives, that are out there. So yeah, the work that you do, it must be a lot of pressure on you as well. So yeah, I think you're great, Terry.
Well, I wasn't fishing for compliments, but I'll happily accept them. Is there anything else either of you would like to mention today?
I think just about our work going forward kind of thing. It's like, still trying to get more MPs on board. That's my aim now. We're getting a change of government as well. So there's going to be a few changes in government. So that will be interesting for our campaigning. But yeah, at the moment, it's working on getting more MPs involved. As I say, I was at the Hopwood Hall College in Manchester, and luckily Elsie Blundell was there, she is part of the Transport Select Committee. And so I managed to have a conversation with her, and she said that she'll have a meeting with me and my MP, which is good, and that I'll be able to speak with her. It was just so lucky that she was there. We were promised that Andy Burnham would be there as well, but I think with everything going on, he probably wasn't able to. But as I say, if we do have, and it's looking like we are going to have Andy Burnham as the Prime Minister, then I think that's quite hopeful as well, because I know that he has supported the Hillsborough families in not getting their voices heard and getting justice for them. And so hopefully he looks at road safety like that and our campaigning like that as well, that this has been going on for decades as well about graduated driving licensing. So hopefully, we get Andy on board with our campaign. But I've also got a local MP to me, Josh McAllister. He's the Children and Families Minister. And as Ian mentioned earlier, the 17-year-old, you are classed as a minor still. And there's so many 17-year-olds that are killed in road traffic collisions. So I'm hoping to get a meeting with him as well. I've written to him recently. But I do have the support actually from all the Cumbrian MPs. There was a letter written from my police crime and fire commissioner from Cumbria, and all the MPs did sign the letter to the Department for Transport about graduated driving licensing. But why I specifically want to speak to Josh is because he is the Minister for Children and Families. So hopefully, as I say, all my writing to MPs recently, I get a few more on board.
I'd say two things, Terry. Thank you to driving instructors for what you do, because I don't think I could do it. So I think that's really, really important role in society that we probably don't thank you enough. And secondly, don't underestimate how influential you guys are, because you're influential with the young person that's in your car with you on any particular day, and the opportunity to make a difference with one individual is real. Don't underestimate that. Keep going. And secondly, through your professional organisations, driving instructors' voice should be louder at government tables, and it isn't. So I would encourage the professional organisations who represent your profession to shout louder, to get the pointy elbows out and get at those tables more than maybe than you currently do.
Rossi, you are the patron of the ADI NJC, of which I am.
I haven't mentioned.
Yes. Probably should have started with that, to be fair, shouldn't we? Okay, cool. Well, Ian, do you want to just take a moment just to tell people where they can find you, or if there's somewhere you'd like to direct people?
So I use LinkedIn as an easy vehicle for kind of contact, if you like. If anybody wants to listen to what my rants or my posts are, then that's probably the best way. Yeah.
And Sharon, where can people find you? Is there any way you want to direct anyone?
To reach out to me, that I'm the same as Ian, actually. It'd be on LinkedIn probably. But yeah, I don't mind anybody reaching out to me. And if there's any families out there that want to join our campaign, and then please do reach out to us. Anybody listening to this might suddenly think, oh, well, that might have saved my child's life as well, So yes, please do reach out to us. And I am mainly on LinkedIn, but my email address can probably be found or passed on through Break, the road safety charity.
I'll link all links to those in the show notes, but I just want to take a moment to thank you for joining me today. Thank you for sharing those stories, and thank you for all the campaigning you're doing. I think that you guys, and the more of the road safety vicinity, if you like, the more that you guys support us as driving instructors, it actually empowers us a bit more. When parents and pupils hear other people talking about this rather than just us sounding like we're nagging in a car, it creates a broader spectrum. So yeah, big thank you for joining us today, and big thank you for all you do.
No, thank you, Terry.
Yeah. And thank you for inviting us and getting the message out. That's really, really important.
Yeah, thank you so much for all your support, Terry.
The Instructor Podcast with Terry Cook, talking with leaders, innovators, experts and game changers about what drives them.